Within the confines of Naruto, there is a lot of polarizing characters. Some people love Hidan, some people hate him, some people for some reason like Sasuke, more logical people hate him. But truly one of the most polarizing and enigmatic characters in the entirety of Naruto has to be none other than Kabuto. Kabuto has so many questions revolving around him, people truly don't know whether or not he ends up being a good guy or a bad guy by the end of the story. People theorize that he was a double agent or a triple agent or a quadruple agent throughout the duration of Naruto's runtime. But truly, wherever you fall in terms of how much you like Kabuto, you have to admit that he is one of the more interesting characters throughout Naruto. I mean, he's my second least favorite character the entirety of the show, but here I am making a video about him. But whenever I tend to do you-know-nothings about a certain character, my opinion of them does change, so maybe that'll happen today, but probably not. Before we get to changing anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And since we're talking about change, guys, I have different content on this platform, most notably my other two YouTube pages, NCGamer23, where instead of talking about anime, I play video games. Currently, we're on a playthrough of Subnautica Below Zero. And then my other page, Hammer's Collection, where instead of talking about anime while sitting in a chair, I talk about anime while I build giant anime statues. But before we get into all that, guys, today we have a brand new sponsor to the page, Dislight. Dislight is a futuristic mythology RPG mobile game. It's set in the near future, where a giant cataclysm brings the gods from Norse, Chinese, Greek, and Egyptian mythology to the modern day. But these aren't the boring old gods you read about in 4th grade. Anubis is a kendo master and a gentleman, and Odin is a windy motorcycle girl. Let me tell you, I'd like to take a ride on that motorcycle. The real reason we're talking about Dislight is because Zeus has awoken. Dislight has launched its newest Esper, the King of Gods. You see, Gaius was one of the first Espers to ever receive godly power, and he, along with a few other Espers, formed the Esper Union. And while Gaius currently takes a backseat to the goings-on of Earth, he always maintains a serious attitude. He's incredibly focused, straight to the point, and discreet. And he believes that he and the Esper Union will solve the problems facing the world. As for how Gaius plays as an Esper, he's an incredibly strong DPS. And that's just in his normal state, because you see, Gaius is able to activate the God King mode. In this mode, he's able to control the power of thunder. On top of this, Gaius is the only Esper capable of using a God mode, which makes him stronger than most other Espers. So what are you guys waiting for? There's never been a better time to download Dislight. The rate of summoning Zeus is only up during this activity. So download Dislight using the link in my description and my pinned comment, and use the code EsperUnion after you download it for some incredible gifts. Almighty Zeus has awoken, but have you?
Dislight. Download now.
So, Kabuto, where do we truly even begin with this character? What we once believed was a friendly face in the Chunin exams eventually became the architect of the 4th Great Shinobi World War. What character outside of Sasuke or Orochimaru has had an appearance that long that has changed so drastically? But what drove Kabuto to change so drastically throughout the duration of the show? Or the real question, did he ever truly change? Were Kabuto's motivations the same in the early days of Naruto as they were at the end of Shippuden? Is he misunderstood or truly evil? We'll answer all of those questions and many, many more, but first we have to talk about what makes Kabuto Kabuto. So let's start these videos like we usually start these videos, at the beginning. You see, we don't know a whole lot about Kabuto's backstory, and that's mostly because Kabuto doesn't know a whole lot about his backstory. You see, Kabuto was found as a child by Nono Yakushi, and he was found in a city recently destroyed by the 3rd Great Shinobi World War's battles. You see, Kabuto was roughly Itachi's age, maybe a little bit older. So while the 3rd Great Shinobi World War was at the peak of its violence, he was about 4 or 5. And the 3rd Great Shinobi World War was the bloodiest of all of the conflicts in the Naruto universe, meaning that several small villages, like the one that Kabuto lived in, got destroyed in the crossfire of these battles. And within this crossfire, Kabuto was injured. Specifically, he had a head injury, which caused him to have amnesia. He didn't remember why he was there, his name, or anything about his life. He was essentially a clean slate, which was both a good thing for him and a bad thing for him. Good thing in that he probably didn't remember watching his parents get murdered. Bad thing in the fact that the person who saved him, Nono Yakushi, was an Anbu member working for the Root. And even amongst other Root members, she was a genius in intelligence gathering. But why is that a bad thing? I mean, Nono Yakushi just healed Kabuto and brought him back to an orphanage in Konoha, right? And that's true, that is what happens, but here's the thing. Nono Yakushi left the route in order to become a regular jonin who could run the orphanage in Konoha. I don't know if you guys have seen my You Know Nothing About Danzo, but he doesn't like losing valuable people. And that's exactly what Nono Yakushi was to him. So even though Nono Yakushi did a really good job raising Kabuto, she's actually the person who named him. When he returned to the orphanage with a head injury, one of the other orphans put a helmet on his head to prevent him from getting even more injured. And because Kabuto didn't know his name, it prompted the other orphan, Uroshi, to name him Kabuto, which is helmet in Japanese. That's why the Kabuto Pokemon is just like a little helmet. And Kabuto liked this name. Kabuto liked the name so much that he left his bed at night to go thank Nono for giving him this name. However, when Kabuto was caught out of bed significantly after curfew, she realized he couldn't read a clock. So she took him to the orphanage's clock and saw that he was squinting to look at it. And it was at that point that she realized he couldn't see. So she gave him her glasses. And for the first time since he had woken up from his amnesia haze, he could see, and he started to cry with thankfulness for Nono because of all she had done for him. And this is truly where we do our first dive into Kabuto as a human. When you look at Kabuto's backstory, that of a war-stricken orphan who's a blank slate because they've lost all memory of their previous life, we truly start to see the stripe that begins to draw itself through the entirety of his life. Kabuto lost the entirety of his life before his head injury. And when he awoke, he was brought to a different place surrounded by entirely new people, given a new name and a new lease on life with glasses. But is that who Kabuto is? You see, with having a restart put in your life, forgetting who your parents are at such a formative age, like 4 or 5 years old, it could lead to you asking questions like, who am I really down the line? And this is a core personality trait to Kabuto. His entire life is him looking for who he is. And that is never more apparent than in the next arc of his life, which kickstarts his career as a spy. You see, Nono Yakushi was very well practiced in medical ninjutsu. And because she was so well practiced in medical ninjutsu, she would use her medical ninjutsu on jonin coming back from war and heal them for money, essentially running a private practice. And Nono would use the funds garnered by this private doctoral practice in order to pay for things at the orphanage. And this is where Kabuto began his career as a ninja. Nono taught Kabuto medical ninjutsu so he could assist her in healing these jonin. And he would gladly do it because to him, Nono was his mother. Remember, he has no recollection of his previous life. And this is the woman who has clothed, raised, given him sight, and named him. He has so much respect for Nono that he wants to be just like her. And while there is nothing wrong with Nomo as a woman, that is an unfortunate choice to choose as Kabuto, because this personal doctoral practice didn't garner enough money to keep the orphanage up and running. And remember how I said Danzo doesn't like to let useful things slip through his fingers? Well, he realized that the orphanage wasn't making enough money, so he propositioned Nono with coming back to the root. He told Nono that unless she volunteered to go spy in Iwa, aka the Hidden Stone, and volunteer one of the orphans to replace a root member they had just lost in battle, that he would pull Konoha's funding for the orphanage. This is why I love Danzo. Consistently evil. Obviously, this flew Nono into a rage. Essentially, all of the orphans were her adopted children. She was, after all, known as mother in the orphanage. But because she knew that Danzo was fully willing to pull the funding for an orphanage in order to make her go to Iwa, she accepted. However, little did she know that Kabuto was actually spying on this conversation. And Kabuto, upon hearing that she was gonna go to Iwa and that they needed an orphan from the orphanage to go to Iwa along with her, volunteered himself. You see, this could be tied to one of two reasons. The first reason is essentially stating that Kabuto didn't want to be separated from Nono. And this isn't the craziest theory of all time, considering the fact that Nono was his entire universe. She took him in, clothed him, named him, gave him glasses. The second reason is that Kabuto wants to be just like Nono. And upon realizing that she was this master of espionage, he realized he too wanted to be a master of espionage to be more like her. Obviously, Nono told Kabuto to not do this. She understood what the root was and what the root could do to it, considering he was a young, very malleable boy. And in the hands of Danzo, malleability gets turned into a weapon. But Kabuto insisted, and therefore the next arc of his life was within the root. You see, the root trained Kabuto in espionage for years, and he actually learned espionage so proficiently that he was sent to every other single ninja village to pose as a ninja in that village and gather intel. All four by the time he was like 15. However, him spying in every single village didn't go great for him for a long time. You see, when he was sent to spy in Iwa, his last of the 4 major ninja villages he needed to spy on, he was caught. Well, he wasn't necessarily caught, he was cornered. And he attacked the Iwa ninja who cornered him and fatally injured them. However, it was upon fatally wounding this Jonin that he realized that Jonin was Nono. Realizing that not only killing Nono would jeopardize Konoha because she was sent there to gather intel, but also being overwhelmed with the emotions of fatally injuring the person who quite literally raised you, Kabuto flew into a panic and tried to heal her with medical ninjutsu. And as he tried to heal Nono, he profusely apologized to her. But even upon seeing his face, she didn't recognize him. Even when he told her his name, she didn't recognize him. And because Kabuto had wounded her so fatally and her backup was on the way, Kabuto had to leave and let her die. And once again, we have Kabuto losing directionality in the sense of who he is. Now, twice in his life, he has lost who he was. When he was significantly younger and received the head trauma that made him lose all his memories, and now upon the loss of Nono, because Kabuto simply wanted to be like her. So to lose her and then have her not realize who he is made him lose sense of who he was once again. And unfortunately for him, there was somebody who realized that he, upon the loss of Nono, would once again be a clean slate. And that person was Orochimaru, who at this time was also a Root member. You see, Orochimaru had been watching Kabuto for a long time. He was, after all, one of Danzo's underlings, and therefore was in a position to watch Kabuto's growth as a member of the Root. Orochimaru then went on to tell Kabuto that Danzo had been giving Nono falsified photos of Kabuto to make her believe that he looked different. Essentially, Danzo deep faked Kabuto's face every single day to Nono until she wouldn't recognize him when he appeared. But why did Danzo do this? Well, because Nono and Kabuto knew too much. They had spied in every single one of the major villages, but also had a proclivity to raising orphans in the orphanage. Remember earlier when I said you don't just leave the Root? Yeah, that's because of Danzo. So Danzo, now making sure that neither of them would recognize each other should they happen to bump into each other in Iwa, was finding a way to eliminate his 2 most knowledgeable and therefore dangerous spies left in the field. Upon hearing this, Kabuto flew into a rage, because now in the matter of a half of a day, Kabuto has once again lost every piece of his identity he held on to. Not only has he lost Nono, his true North Star, he's also lost the Root. Danzo just tried to kill him, and therefore why would he have any allegiance to the Root or Konoha? Once again, making him a person with no allegiances in no direction. Being enraged by the situation, Kabuto went to attack Orochimaru, but Orochimaru, being substantially stronger than him in the moment, was able to survive it. And upon surviving his attack, Orochimaru suggested to Kabuto that Kabuto join his village, the Hidden Sound Village. A hidden village where individuality thrives. And this kind of offering was now tempting to Kabuto, because everything and everyone he had ever trusted had either died, disappeared, or betrayed him. So with a new fabricated backstory about Nono finding him after the Battle of Kikyo Pass, he was able to become a genin in Konoha, which has never truly sat right with me, because did Danzo not just see Kabuto walking around? It's not like he looks any different. He's still a tall, silver-haired man with glasses. Like, oh look, there's nerdy Kakashi. I thought I killed him.
You could be like, oh, Danzo wasn't watching the Chunin exams.
Why? Of all people, would Danzo not be watching the Chunin exams? The only person who loves strong children more than Danzo is Hisoka. And I guess Orochimaru, because he was quite literally sent to the Chunin exams to gather information on the strong genin for Orochimaru. But unfortunately for Kabuto, his allegiances for Orochimaru didn't last very long. Well, they kind of did and kind of didn't. See, because after the conclusion of the Chunin exams, Kabuto was found by the Akatsuki. Once again, decided, let's confuse the ever-living shit out of this kid. Essentially, Kabuto was found by Sasori. And I don't know if you know anything about the relationship between Orochimaru and the Akatsuki, but it's not good. Essentially, Orochimaru left the Akatsuki after attacking Itachi. But Itachi obviously won the fight, so Orochimaru decided to slither off and not deal with the Akatsuki anymore. Obviously, this hole left by Orochimaru in the Akatsuki is why Deidara had to join the Akatsuki. And because of that, Deidara and Sasori are kind of on a constant mission to kill Orochimaru, and therefore any information that they can get on Orochimaru is very crucial to them. Therefore, when Sasori and Deidara encountered Kabuto, they decided to make him a sleeper agent. What does that mean? Well, Sasori has an ability a bit like Illumi's ability in Hunter x Hunter. Essentially, if Sasori places a needle in your memory center, aka your brain, he's able to control you as a sleeper agent. More specifically, he's able to suppress all of your memories with this needle. But how does this needle work? Does it just make you a blank slate again? No, not really. It's actually a lot more complicated than that. Essentially, this needle can suppress certain memories, but also if it's used on somebody like Kabuto, they'll still believe that they are 100% loyal to the person they're spying on. You see, Kabuto was living with Orochimaru for all of these years, doing tasks for him, helping him with his scientific research. And all this time, Kabuto thought he was just working with Orochimaru and helping Orochimaru, when in reality, he was often actually taking trips out to meet Sasori and report on the findings about Orochimaru. But these are the memories that Sasori would suppress, and therefore, within Kabuto's own mind, he was only serving Orochimaru. It's essentially the perfect spy, because Orochimaru had no reason to suspect Kabuto because he was 100% loyal to Orochimaru. And once again, we add an additional layer to the layer of Kabuto's separation from him to his true core personality. Hold on, guys, before we go any further, Harmy Anime hooked us up again with a massive statue, and I want you to see what we're cracking into. But with no further ado, let's find something to fill up this blank space down here in the statue we're about to build. Now for everyone's favorite part. Nick pulls a box out of a box, but fortunately, this box has plastic wrapping, which I can use to pull. Come on! We did it. This was provided to us by Harmy Anime. Harmy Anime has 2 online websites, which you can see on the screen right now, and a physical location in the Santa Anita Mall in California, Arcadia specifically. And when I tell you this is far from the only Demon Slayer statue I have, I feel like I'm underestimating. This store is chock full of Demon Slayer statues. Anybody you want from Demon Slayer, they got a statue of it. But enough about the other statues they have. Let's get to unboxing this one. We have a tree sprouting out here. We have a couple of pink flowers. We have this red and white rope. This tree is absolutely gorgeous. The texturing on it is awesome. And then in the back here, we got this big old snake's tail. Who do you guys think it could be? It's not like he was on the box or anything and he's still staring at me from the side of the room. Now, for the 3rd time in Kabuto's life, he has a pseudo family. And that pseudo family is the hidden sound in Orochimaru. And while he believes he's being loyal to Orochimaru and therefore emulating Orochimaru's actions, disciplines, scientific research, all of that, he's actually undermining Orochimaru without even knowing. But if this technique is canceled, i.e. the user dies or just breaks the jutsu, you will remember all of the actions you did as a sleeper agent. And I guess fortunately for Orochimaru, he realized that Kabuto was being controlled and therefore broke him out of this jutsu. Kabuto, mortified and angered by the fact that he was spying on somebody who he held absolute loyalty to, decided to then flip this and spy on the Akatsuki for Orochimaru. However, Orochimaru really didn't have to break Kabuto out of this jutsu because just about this time is when Sasori, well, you know, which is why when the first time that Kabuto met with Sasori after being broken out of this jutsu, he attacked Sasori only to find out that it was Yamato and the rest of Team 7 including Sai now. And then there's a lot of back and forth with Sai, an anime-only arc about the Three Tails and Gurren, and then we get to the Itachi Pursuit Arc. See, this arc is also very pivotal for Kabuto, because Kabuto now is finally just loyal to Orochimaru and living without being a sleeper agent. However, Orochimaru's body is failing, and Kabuto is helping him with the pain and also telling Orochimaru that he has to transfer to Sasuke's body soon. However, when coming back from the lab one day, he sees Sasuke leaving Orochimaru's lair, and as he opens the door, he sees Orochimaru's body laying there abandoned. So he asks Sasuke as he walks out of the lair who he is, if he's Orochimaru or Sasuke. To which Sasuke responds by putting him in a Genjutsu with his Sharingan and showing him how he overpowered Orochimaru's consciousness and absorbed it into himself. And once again, Kabuto is left without anybody to be loyal to, because Sasuke is now leaving the lair having got the power that he was looking for in the first place, and Orochimaru is effectively dead. So Kabuto does what any rational person would do in this situation and injects himself with the remains of Orochimaru's body, which actually does give us a very good look into his psyche, which we'll talk about in a second. Because after injecting himself with Orochimaru's remains, he goes out to find Naruto, and he gives Naruto a book filled with all of the notes that Orochimaru and Kabuto gathered on the Akatsuki over the years. And Naruto wonders why Kabuto, an enemy of Konoha, would do this. And Kabuto tells Naruto because he respects him. Because Naruto, who was only able to once identify as the host of the nine-tailed beast, has now become greater than that, has forged his own identity that is individualistic and strong. He has effectively become not just the host of the Nine Tails, but a stronger version of the Nine Tails. And Kabuto wants that for himself. And while some of the tenements here are absolutely correct in what Kabuto should have focused on, he unfortunately took the wrong route. You see, Kabuto was dismayed in the fact that he identified with Orochimaru for so long, realizing that he was forging his entire personality around a singular person, which is arguably what he's done his entire life. So now, in order to emulate the growth that he's seen in Naruto, he has grafted Orochimaru's cells onto him so he could become a stronger, better, greater Orochimaru, which is arguably the opposite of what he stated he wanted to do. See, Kabuto wanted to become an individual, a strong individual who could blaze his own path. And upon reeling from the reality that he was simply following Orochimaru's own life, decided to become Orochimaru. So on one hand, acknowledging the fact that he's been following people his entire life and therefore has never had an opportunity to make his own personality, and on the other hand, quite literally taking somebody else's personality. However, what Kabuto didn't realize is how powerful Orochimaru's remains would be. And as Hinata looks at Kabuto with her Byakugan, she realizes that Orochimaru's remains are taking over his body. But this isn't where Kabuto stopped. Kabuto, upon realizing that the power that grafting Orochimaru's cells onto his body gifted him, decided to find other dead ninjas to graft into his body. In fact, he goes so far as to graft the cells of all of the Sound Village 5 onto his body and gain their specific Kekkei Genkais, and thus essentially just becoming an amalgamation of a bunch of other people, which is truly the opposite of what Naruto did, but is also very in line with somebody who's looking for a personality. See, those without strong wills or bright personalities tend to latch on to those with strong wills or bright personalities. And while there's nothing necessarily wrong with this in a larger sense, building your entire personality around one person can lead to some issues down the line, the largest of which is the loss of your sense of self. You'll begin to forget what you like or what your motivations are, and you'll simply start to ask questions like, what would this person do in this situation? Not what would I do? And for somebody who has struggled with personality issues their entire life, this is an incredibly dangerous path for Kabuto to take. Kabuto's never had the will or the situation to make his own personality, and every time he gets wiped like a clean slate, somebody else is there to mold that new personality. However, once Kabuto has officially gained control of all Orochimaru and everybody else's powers, he reaches out to Tobi. Essentially, he wants to help Tobi, who's been masquerading as Madara Uchiha, to start the Fourth Great Shinobi World War. And the reason he wants to do it is because he wants Sasuke, a motivation that was never truly his. Tobi wants to reject this notion, but when Kabuto uses Edo Tensei to bring up 5 coffins, 4 of which were dead Akatsuki members and the 5th of which was Madara Uchiha, because Madara's corpse's location had been shown to Kabuto by Black Zetsu, Tobi agrees. And therefore Kabuto uses Deidara in order to make a clay bird to fly them to Turtle Island where Killer Bee and Naruto are, because Tobi said that Kabuto wouldn't be able to have Sasuke until the end of the Fourth Great Shinobi World War, so they had to get Killer Bee and Naruto first. But now Kabuto is working for another person, Tobi, the same person he had been tasked with spying on by Orochimaru, the same person who he had sold out to Naruto. But for some reason, he changed his stance on the Akatsuki in order to fulfill Orochimaru's mission of getting Sasuke. But why? Because Orochimaru hated the Akatsuki. Otherwise, he wouldn't have had a book filled with notes on the Akatsuki that they could hand to Naruto. And this is because Kabuto, without an Orochimaru or Nono or Danzo figure in his life, felt lost. Let's not forget, Kabuto wants to be the best Orochimaru of all time. And the one place that Orochimaru always came up short was getting the perfect host. So in order to accomplish this goal of being the best ever Orochimaru, Kabuto had to deal with Tobi. However, during this process, once again got lost, because after his attack on Turtle Island, he simply caught Yamato, whose wood release abilities he simply used to bolster the strength of the White Zetsu army. You see, Obito/Tobi was a genius when he told Kabuto that he would give him Sasuke at the end of the war, because unwittingly, once again, Kabuto was a clean slate. And Kabuto's a bit like a weapon. He doesn't think, doesn't have personality, you pointed at a direction, you pulled a trigger. And the direction Kabuto was now pointed at was the Fourth Great Shinobi World War. You see, Kabuto could have just been a passive observer to the Fourth Great Shinobi World War. I mean, sure, he had to catch Killer Bee and Naruto, but that could have been the end of it. Kabuto then goes on to capture Anko, whose curse seal he uses to increase the power of Edo Tensei, going so far as to summon Fu and Terune. Kabuto even requests Tobi's help in finding Shisui and Jiraiya's body so they can bring them back, to which, thank God, God, Toby said no. And then for the duration of the 4th Great Shinobi World's War, Kabuto is the puppet master to an army of perfect soldiers. And why is he doing all of this? To make Sasuke his vessel. At least that's what they want us to believe. In reality, Kabuto is simply doing what Kabuto has done his entire life. He's found a strong personality and he's doing anything, and I mean anything he can, to keep that personality happy. That personality is obviously Obito. And above keeping that personality happy, he's also trying to emulate that personality. An emulation of that personality goes far beyond just emotions. It's actions, experiences, wants, needs. Kabuto effectively finds a person and wants to be exactly them. I mean, Kabuto went so far as to help Obito's cause as to make Madara's reincarnated body literally perfect. Every other Edo Tensei person comes back the way they died. So Madara, who died very, very old, would have came back very, very old. However, Kabuto did an insane amount of work and therefore was able to reincarnate Madara at the peak of his youth with a Rinnegan and Hashirama's cells grafted onto him. This is all until Itachi and Sasuke find the cave in which Kabuto is hiding. And after one of the cooler battles in Naruto, in which Sasuke is entirely useless, Itachi puts Kabuto in Izanami. And if you haven't seen my video about Izanami and Izanagi, I'd highly recommend you watch it, but I'll go over what Izanami does very briefly right now. Essentially, Izanami was meant to counteract Izanagi. Izanagi is a Sharingan ability that blinds one of your eyes, but also gives you control over the entire universe for about a minute. You can essentially create anything out of your chakra in this 1 minute. However, because the Uchiha had so much pride in their Sharingan, people using this technique over and over and over again was a shame to the Uchiha. And therefore they had to make a technique to counteract the Izanagi, which was the Izanami, which also blinds a Sharingan. So is it better? Maybe. Regardless, the Izanami puts you in an infinite loop of repeated actions until you accept the thing that the person who put you in Izanami sent you in there to accept. This is to say, until you come to grips with what's wrong with you as a person, you will infinitely stay in a genjutsu loop. So let's just say I just love kicking babies. Like I'm just like out there just punting them 50 yards. And you're like, Nick, at least don't do it in public. Well, if you get me in an Izanami loop, I can't leave that Izanami loop until I say I'll never kick a baby again. And it can't be like, okay, fine, I won't do it, then I'm gonna go do it again. Like it has to be like a core personality change. I have to switch to like kicking toddlers or something. That's actually not how Izanami works. I just reread how it works and I am off base, but it's a funny joke, so I'm keeping it. Izanami was created to counter people who are trying to alter events. Like that's exactly what Izanagi does. Izanami is a counter. I don't know how I missed that. But essentially the goal of Izanami is to humble the person put in it and make them stop wanting to alter the events around them. So fortunately for Kabuto, his life actually sort of applied to these guidelines. The way it applied to Kabuto is that Kabuto was altering his body to be as strong and perseverant as possible, and at the same time denying that his true strength lied in who he was as a person from day one. And therefore the criteria for him to break out of Izanagi would be for him to realize that he doesn't need to continually graft new ninjas onto himself in order to become the strongest amalgamation of ninjas of all time. And in reality, he simply needed to accept who he was and build upon that. And almost immediately, Kabuto feels thankful to Itachi for showing him this. So much so that he then joins the 4th Great Shinobi World War on the side of the shinobi and heals Sasuke from his fatal stab wound from Madara. And after the 4th Great Shinobi World War comes to a close, Kabuto isn't imprisoned for being a war criminal or anything like that. He's just basically monitored like Orochimaru. And since he's realized that he doesn't need to become the strongest version of Orochimaru or anybody else other than himself, he goes back to his earliest memories. His earliest memories being those in the Konoha orphanage. You see, the first person that Kabuto had ever impressed upon was Nono Yakushi, and she was the only person he would ever impress upon that wouldn't try to use him like a tool. And since Kabuto would never recover the memories of what happened to him before his head injury, that was his true childhood. Those moments in the Konoha orphanage when he was learning how to read a clock with Nono Yakushi were as close to a true personality as he would ever get. So realizing that he has to accept himself for who he is and build his strength from that, and also realizing that the only true tidbit that he has that isn't bastardized by somebody else is that time in the orphanage, he goes back to run it, essentially living up to the dream that Nono would have had for him. And he even goes so far as to adopt all of Shin Uchiha's clones, making sure that each and every single one of them gets a name. You see, I think amongst Naruto characters, Kabuto's story is arguably one of the most realistic. Kabuto's story is a story of loss. And while his life is obviously filled with things like physical and emotional loss, that's actually not what I'm talking about. Kabuto's story tells the story of loss of self. How in a world filled with poignant and powerful personalities, somebody with not that can lose themselves. We see this every single day. Things like stan cultures pop up every single day, and people glom on to these larger than life personalities. And thus a person makes a larger than life personality their entire personality. And while there's nothing necessarily wrong with this, it can lead to something that Kabuto deals with: loss of self. When you're so fixated on somebody else, you stop thinking about yourself. And over time, your goals are no longer your goals. Kabuto's life tells us that it doesn't matter if you find somebody else's life inspirational or something that you'd like to emulate. What truly matters is that you work towards those inspirations or emulations in order to better yourself. You can look at the way that Martin Luther King lived his life and understand that there are some core tenements in the way that he lived his life that you could emulate in order to better yourself. But if you try simply to be a hollow facsimile of him, you'll lose who you are, and therefore in a larger sense most likely not live up to the vision that he himself had. God damn it, I did it again. Now I don't hate him as much as I used to. And if this video changed your guys' perception of what used to be my least favorite character of this entire show outside of Sasuke, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Listen, I still don't love him, but I now understand him better than I used to. Why am I like this?